All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight here at the Volume. Happy Thursday, everybody. Hope all of you guys are having a great week. As promised, we're hitting our weekly mailbag today. Got a bunch of good questions from all around the league from you guys. As always, I appreciate you guys supporting the mailbag by dropping your questions. If you want to get questions in the mailbag, go to our full episodes. Every one of them on the thumbnail says full episode on it. There underneath the video in the questions or in the comments, if you just put mailbag and then a colon and write your question, that's where we get our questions for our mailbags that we typically hit on Fridays. But obviously, I just have a bunch of travel here in March, so it's a little kind of janky, but we're going to do them at least once a week throughout the remainder of the year and typically on Fridays, but get those questions in the YouTube comments. Lastly, before we get started, you guys know the drill. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any more of our content. Follow me on Twitter at _JasonLT so you guys don't miss show announcements. We have a podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts under Hoops Tonight. Don't forget it's also helpful if you leave a rating and a review on that front. We also have brand new social media feeds on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, where Jackson's making some incredible content for you guys that you can see throughout the year. And then, as I mentioned earlier, just keep dropping those mailbag questions in the YouTube comments. All right, let's talk some basketball. So, this was a little bit of confusion coming off of our last episode, or 2 episodes ago, I should say. This question is, it's wild to me that we have to question if teams on pace to win 70 games are actually contenders. So I wanted to clarify this. I absolutely think Cleveland and Oklahoma City are contenders. I have never for a second doubted their ability to win the championship. As far as I'm concerned, they have as good a chance as anybody in the league, except for Boston, who I think is playing near the level that those two teams are at in the regular season, while being older veteran teams that are conserving energy throughout the regular season. They're the defending champ. They do not have as much of that day-to-day motivation that teams like Cleveland and Oklahoma City have. What I was trying to call attention to is the simple reality that just because a team wins a shit ton of regular season games doesn't mean they're going to win the championship. I was simply pointing out that there are trends that they need to buck. The trend being the dominant regular season team that ends up running into a wall when they get into the postseason. And I saw a lot of people say things like, well, it's not that they're over 60 wins, it's that they're close to a 70 win pace. And this is where you got to remember, it's not about win pace. It's about the reality that when you get to the end of the season, you're going to find opportunities to rest players in general. When you get into late March, early April, teams start to let their foot off the gas a little bit as they start to prep for a playoff run. For example, the 2018 Rockets went 65-17. They were actually at almost a 68 win pace. They lost 3 of their last 6 games as they let their foot off the gas. The 64-18 Suns in 2022, they were at a much higher win pace. They lost 4 of their last 6 games as they started to tail off before the start of the postseason. The 2020 Bucks, that team was 52-8 at one point in time. They were at a 71 win pace, but they went 4-9 in their last 13 games. Giannis had an injury in there too, so it's a little more complicated there. But the point being is, like, the Cavs and Thunder are probably going to land in that 65 win range, maybe 66, maybe 64, who knows? But the point being is we have seen lots of examples in recent NBA history of this team is the best. They've proven they're the best all season long. And then you get into the postseason and it's an entirely different animal. I'm not insinuating that Cleveland and Oklahoma City can't win the championship. I think they have an awesome chance. It's just a reality about the fact that there's a lot of examples, specifically 5 of the last 7 teams in recent NBA history to have over a 60 win pace in shortened seasons or to end up over 60 wins, failed to get out of the third round of the playoffs, and 4 of those 5 teams failed to get out of the second round. I'm just pointing out that just because a team dominates in the regular season, it's not this like surefire indicator that they're going to win a championship. That's literally all I was trying to call attention to. Next question. What outcomes do you see from the return of Jonathan Kuminga to the Warriors lineup? Whose minutes does he take? And how does he fit with Jimmy Butler? Seems like he could learn a lot from Jimmy, but I worry as a fan that he's also maybe somewhat redundant now. I hope his return doesn't mess with the chemistry of the Warriors, but I'd love to hear your take. Thanks. Love the show. I had several questions kind of centering around this line of thinking, and it's a very interesting question. And it's a fundamentally different question than when Jonathan Kuminga's injury took place and what it might have looked like if he returned to the lineup without a Jimmy Butler trade. right? Without a Jimmy Butler trade, you look at it as like Jonathan Kuminga is going right back into the starting lineup because there's not enough talent in the starting lineup. And Jonathan Kuminga is one of your most talented players, and you just need to infuse as much talent into that lineup as possible. Now it's fundamentally different. I guarantee you, Jonathan Kuminga has thought a lot in the last couple of weeks watching the Warriors. I'm better at basketball than Moses Moody. I'm sure he's thought that. And by the way, he's correct to think that. He is a better basketball player than Moses Moody in a vacuum. But circumstances around that have shifted substantially. The Warriors are no longer just a regular play-in team or north of the play-in team type of team that's trying to like grind out a plucky, spunky, we're going to be a pain in the ass, but then lose in the first or second round type of team. They're a team that has legitimate championship aspirations now. They look at it like we're 12-1 in our last 13 games. We have an opportunity now to do something really special. Within that context, in the starting lineup now, with Jimmy in there, with Steph in there, Moses Moody is a better basketball player in that context with what they need with that lineup. I was talking about this. I went on with Ethan Strauss yesterday, and Ethan's just one of the absolute best in the business, and I just really enjoy working with him because he's such a gifted conversationalist, and he always has something very interesting to say. We went for almost an hour and a half yesterday. I highly recommend you guys check that out if you haven't yet, and they do have it on YouTube as well if you go to his YouTube channel. But we were talking specifically about this concept surrounding like The Secret from the old Bill Simmons basketball book, and the idea that these pieces of talent have a habit of like fitting together in a way that's either going to be less than the sum of their parts or more than the sum of their parts based on these intricacies of the way that the game of basketball comes together with a bunch of different types of talent, right? And that's the thing. Like, part of what has led to a lot of success with the recent Warriors run is the shortening of the rotation. And the fact that now that you've cleaned out some of your glut of role player talent and you brought in a star talent, there are these clearly defined roles with the starters now where it's like Brandon Podziemski's going to guard the best guard and Moses Moody's going to guard the best wing, and Pods is going to run a little bit of second side action, but primarily function as like a connective playmaker with the team. And Moses Moody is going to be primarily operating off the ball in the corner as a spot up shooter in those actions. It is all clarified, and it's perfectly accentuated their skill sets. What is Moses Moody great at? Guarding the ball, attacking closeouts, and spotting up, right? What is Brandon Podziemski great at? Ball pressure, defending on the perimeter, defensive rebounding, connective playmaking. And so all of a sudden it's crystallized and those guys are perfect in their roles. If you took Moses Moody out and you put Jonathan Kuminga in there, Jonathan Kuminga would be able to do a good job of guarding the ball. That's always been a specific strength of his, but he's a much worse off-ball defender than Moses Moody. And then playing off of Jimmy and Steph, Moses Moody is a more valuable offensive player because he's more of a reliable catch-and-shoot player. So you got to start zooming out and thinking about the current construct of the team and where Kuminga's skill set can be helpful. And to me, the one thing he's pretty good at right now in the serious basketball context is he's kind of a microwave scorer. Like, he's so talented that like on certain nights he can go for 20, 25, 30 points. Then in other nights he can be, 4 for 13 from the field and not be a very useful offensive player. We see that archetype succeed even on good playoff teams as a bench microwave scorer. I like the idea of partnering him in bench units with Jimmy Butler without Steph on the floor in these situations where Jimmy can help set him up for opportunities with like cleared side ISOs, get the spacing set up properly. Jimmy can be the floor general to put Jonathan Kuminga in situations to have success as an ISO player or as a post-up type of player, right? And he can do a little bit of that with Steph as well, overlapping with both groups, but in bench groups where they need offense. I don't think he's a guy that's going to step into the starting lineup. I don't think he's a guy who's going to step into the closing lineup. And that's the one kind of like wrinkle with this. Jonathan Kuminga is young. He spent a lot of years not getting consistent opportunity to be aggressive and to be himself because the Warriors were a serious championship contender in the early years of his career. Then finally, it kind of shifts to where there's not much of a championship potential over the course of the last year. And there's not a lot of like reliable secondary shot creation talent. And so they were force feeding Kuminga a lot. And he was getting a lot more opportunities to be an athlete, to score the basketball. But now we've shifted back into that dead serious championship contention phase. And it's one of those things where they're going to have to go back to the old ways where it's like, hey, dude, you're coming off the bench. And if you're playing good, we're going to ride you. And if you're not, we're probably going to pull you. Like, and that's the new dynamic. That is the old dynamic that Kuminga was facing in years past. And so there is a certain question mark as to whether or not Kuminga is going to be willing to do this. And if he kicks and screams and he doesn't want to fit into the larger goals of the team, it's going to end up hurting his opportunities in the rotation. I'm hopeful that Kuminga will see the opportunity and embrace it and lean into it and just be like, hey, Kerr is crafting out a role for me now where I can come in with these specific bench units and he wants me to be aggressive. But then if he ever wants to see the floor in a larger context, in closing time, things along those lines, he's going to have to really, really parse down his game into a smaller role that Kerr is looking for from him in those groups. And so that's going to be the challenge. It's going to be a little bit of Kuminga embracing a role. It's going to be a little bit of Kerr trying to actually build out roles for him in specific lineups. But there's no doubt that the circumstances have changed since he got hurt, and it's going to be a little bit different than it looked the last time he was playing for this team. Next question, also in the Warriors vein. I know that the Warriors are not yet currently in your top 5 of inner circle contenders, but are they the best of the second tier contenders? And also, what do you think the Dubs have to do in order to get into your inner circle of contenders? Here's the thing. I'm pretty sure I'm going to end up adding them to my inner circle of contenders. They have several specific things that I look for in championship contention, like veteran comfortability in the postseason context. Steve Kerr, I think, is one of the better game planners out there in the league in terms of dealing with the chess match of NBA playoff series. Jimmy and Steph are two of the most reliable playoff stars in the history of the league, and they have a depth of role player talent that's all really good at defense and that have a skill set that fits alongside Jimmy and Steph. So we don't need to be rocket scientists about this. I think they're going to end up making that list sooner than later. Really, I'm just waiting for a few more games, specifically some high leverage games. Like, you want to know why I moved the Lakers into that list? Because they literally, in this recent stretch of games that they've been dominant, they won something like, I think it was 14 consecutive games against teams that were 500 or better. And they beat other teams in that top tier of contenders. I saw Steph and the Warriors beat Boston and OKC earlier in the year in different constructs, which is a big part of why I believe they're going to, and I think things are going to be fine. I just want to see some more of these higher leverage games before I put them in that list, but I think it's almost a certainty that I'm going to put them in there sooner than later. But as far as the actual baseline like concept of what I look at in teams to be a good playoff team that has the actual potential to win 4 playoff rounds, I look at, do you have the star talent that thrives in that setting? Yes, the Warriors do. Do the Warriors have the overall level of like game planning necessary from their coaching staff and from their stars to win chess matches in the postseason? Yes, I think they do. Do I think they have role players that can do enough on offense and defense to compete in that context? Yes, I do. So it's just a question of when. And for the record, I don't even know where I'm putting the Lakers in that list yet either. There's just still so much that's up in the air for them. I just am certain they're in that list. I just don't know where it's going to be. And who knows? Maybe when it's all said and done, I'll have the Warriors and Lakers at 5 and 6. Maybe I'll have the Warriors and Lakers at 3 and 4. I don't know. We're going to come up with that over the course of the next few weeks. We're actually doing a contender video breakdown list that's going to be starting here relatively shortly that you guys can follow along. But here's the thing. It's a great betting opportunity right now on DraftKings. The Warriors are plus 1,400 to win the finals and plus 650 to win the Western Conference, which is tied for third with the Los Angeles Lakers. So they've got a real shot here And there's a good betting opportunity there at those prices that you guys can check out. Next question. Who's scoring big in the NBA this season? You are, with all the new ways to get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. From monster slams to dishing the rock to cleaning the glass, get behind your favorite players and the prop bets you can make on DraftKings, the home of NBA player props. Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something simple like picking how many points your favorite player will have. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick. Right now, the Oklahoma City Thunder have supplanted the Boston Celtics as the favorites to win the title on DraftKings at plus 225, with the Celtics right behind them at plus 235. First time, here's something special just for you. New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Take it to the rack with DraftKings Sportsbook. Every point counts. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code HOOPS. That's HOOPS. That's code HOOPS for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Which potential first-round series do you see could be an upset? The Detroit Pistons playing against the New York Knicks, or the Indiana Pacers going against the Bucks? This is an interesting question because both teams have had advantages against these teams in recent history. The Pacers have consistently given the Bucks issues over the past 2 years. They ended up stealing a game from the Bucks last night on a wild 4-point play, or 2 nights ago, from Tyrese Halliburton. And the Detroit Pistons have had some success against the Knicks this year in their head-to-head matchups. I think there's some specific personnel stuff, like Cade Cunningham, similar to Luka Doncic, is this big surgical playmaking forward that is going to have a lot of success attacking smaller guards or bigs that have to defend in traditional ball screen coverages that can't switch. And Brunson's a small guard, and Karl Anthony Towns is the kind of guy that has to guard in traditional coverages for the most part, right? And the Pacers, they match up really well with the Bucks because they're fast, and the Bucks are notoriously slow at several key position groups. And so just through playing in transition and by playing in drive and kick, they can consistently cause issues for the Bucks. So both of them have these matchup issues. I'm going to pick the Pistons as more likely to beat the Knicks simply because of the Giannis element. I know we've been distant from Giannis for a while because he's had some unfortunate injuries in his last 2 playoff runs. And it's just a bummer because, like, literally the last time we watched Giannis play like a full healthy playoff series was in 2022 against the Boston Celtics in the second round, when he dragged that series to 7 games without Chris Middleton because he was like a human wrecking ball for 6 games before he ran out of gas and kind of started to fall apart in that game 7. So, like, Giannis is just such an indomitable force that even with the advantages that the Pacers have in that matchup, I think it's just more likely that Giannis can overcome those problems than Jalen Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns, if that makes sense. What's the more impressive award, MVP or Finals MVP? Usually I'd say Finals MVP because it's on the highest stage of ball, but I think someone like Shea or Jokic leading their team to top seeds for an entire season is more impressive than someone like Jaylen Brown doing it for one series. I know Jaylen is a lower-level Finals MVP, but even the legendary Finals runs like Giannis's or Steph's are debatable when compared to season-long dominance. Even if the regular season isn't as competitive as the playoffs, what are your thoughts? And bonus question, what would it take for you to become a voter in the NBA? I think you're one of only a few people deserving of one, including current voters. Let's get to the first question first. So here's the thing. If you ask me what's more impressive, MVP or Finals MVP, I'm going to say MVP because it's just a much more substantial accomplishment that requires a much longer term, a longer period of success, right? And there's just a lot of examples of Finals MVPs in the past that probably shouldn't have gone to certain guys. Like Jaylen Brown just played so much better than Tatum, and the Celtics were so good that he kind of had to win Finals MVP. But like theoretically, like Tatum is the guy that kind of unlocks their defensive scheme. He's the better all-around player. Like you could argue Tatum should have got it. Going back to 2015, right? Like there's the Steph Curry piece with Andre Iguodala where it's like Iguodala gets MVP because people don't understand what they're watching with Steph getting blitzed every time. They just see Andre Iguodala scoring and they just think that means he did it. When the reality is Steph is getting double teamed 30 feet from the basket. And that's what's actually causing all of this success, right? So like Finals MVP as an award has been given out haphazardly over the years. So on that level, I agree. If you simplified it down to what's a more impressive award, MVP or being the best player on a championship team, I'm always going to go with option two. Regular season MVP is one of my least favorite awards to discuss because it's so political. It's so much about narrative. There's a lot of examples of like bringing in catch-all metrics from voters to try to affect their decision-making process. It's just not a process that I'm particularly fond of. That said, it is a remarkable accomplishment when you do get in the running for that award. But most of those guys that end up being the best player on a championship team were in the MVP race most of the season anyway. They just didn't end up winning it. And so ultimately, if you're the guy that's hoisting the Larry O'Brien trophy and you're clearly the best player on that team, or you play at a superstar level for that team, I'm going to view that as more impressive than anything involving regular season success. On the second question about being a voter for the NBA, I'm not actually sure how the process itself works. I think you get nominated for it, but the truth of the matter is like, I don't think I'm a good pick for that specific job. And the main reason why is like, I think passion is what drives quality work. And I've notoriously in my life been a person who's lazy about things I don't care about and that works hard on things that I love. And frankly, I don't care about first team all NBA or all defense teams or most valuable player. They're all fantasy basketball to me. And I actually, around this time of year, I greatly prefer focusing on the contenders and like really, really understanding these teams, how they match up with other teams, and focusing on the real basketball, which is playoff basketball. And so here's the thing. If I'm asked to do it one day, I'm not 100% sure I'd say no because it's such an honor. But like, I'm not necessarily sure I'd be very good at it just because I don't care. And that would probably lead to shoddy work. And I don't want to be responsible for voting on these awards if I'm not going to put my heart and soul in it. So like, another way of putting it is if I get asked one day, I'm going to ask myself a serious question, which is, are you up for this? And if I'm not, then I'm just going to say no because I don't want it to affect the quality of the show. And I don't want it to be something where I'm specifically factoring into like the player's ability to earn the supermax and like all that kind of stuff unless my heart and soul is truly in it. So hopefully that kind of answers your question. Hi, Jason. Given the predictable Philly Phoenix implosions that have dominated the media headlines, I feel like not enough attention has been paid to how big of a disappointment Orlando's season has been. Injuries have certainly played a role, but I'm struggling to understand how they stayed afloat with Paolo and Franz being out. Yeah, without Suggs, they look like a lottery team. I also think their front office has largely evaded scrutiny for their abysmal drafting/free agent signings since Paolo. I'm not sold on Anthony Black, Jet Howard, or Tristan Da Silva, and the KCP contract is now a negative asset given how he's performed. It seems clear that once again, the lack of shooting and aggregate ball handling and initiation is suffocating the offense and is taking a toll on Paolo and Franz to create everything for themselves and their teammates. If you were their GM this offseason, what sort of moves would you implement to get this team back on track? Thanks as always for your content. So it's complicated because I think there's a couple of different pathways that can go forward from here. It hasn't looked pretty. Since Franz came back, they're 7-14 in their last 21 games. It's a combination of all the things you talked about. Like, I do think that Jalen Suggs is the ceiling raiser for this defense. They're a mediocre defense this year in this recent stretch. In the 7-14 stretch, I think they're 11th in defensive rating with everybody but Jalen Suggs, right? And Jalen Suggs is just arguably the best point of attack defender in the entire NBA, arguably the best guard defender in the entire NBA, arguably the best ball pressure guy in the entire NBA. He's just so good at his job. And he also is one of the key guys that kind of unlocks things for them offensively. His ghost screen actions that he would run with Paolo and Franz would help get favorable switches because teams were worried about Jalen Suggs as a movement shooter. And him slipping out of those ghost screens would get a lot of quality shots. And Jalen Suggs at various stretches this year and in the past would get super hot from three and light teams up, right? So I think the absence of Jalen Suggs has absolutely hurt them on both ends of the floor. We talked about it after the Cavs series last year, but they're just brutally bad as jump shooters, and it's a problem. In the 21 game stretch recently that I was just referencing, Paolo, Franz, and KCP and Wendell Carter Jr. are all shooting below 30% from three. So like if you're not getting the same level of advantages because one of your pet actions is taken out, if none of your guys can make a jump shot, if your defense isn't as elite as it used to be because you're not as fast on the perimeter, you're just not as good of a basketball team. Now, moving forward, as you mentioned, talking about like different directions to go forward, you basically have to decide. Decide which direction you want to go in terms of initiating offense. So I've talked about this before with like the Pistons and like the Hawks and some of these other teams regarding like this phase of a rebuild where it's like you got some good young talent, but you don't know what the next step is to become great. And what you do is for a large sample over a couple of years, you let them play and you find out what they're good at and what they suck at. And so what's complicated is like the Magic looked really good at times over the last 2 years with Paolo and Franz as the initiators of their offense because they were so damn good defensively and they were so damn good on the glass, and not having a traditional point guard who would be a limited, like, so, say for instance, you were like, how about we try to poach D'Angelo Russell? And we pull D'Angelo Russell in here and we let him basically run our offense and let Paolo and Franz play off of him. And that would just grease the wheels for our defense. He's knockdown, catch and shoot 3-point guy. He can, like we talked about earlier with like Jimmy Butler setting up Kuminga, he can help set up Paolo and Franz with more advantage situations and get the spacing right. Just kind of be their floor general. Okay, if you do that, are you still the Orlando Magic on defense? Are you, if you play him next to Suggs, do you still have the physical imposition that you have if it's KCP, right? Or it's one of those things where it's a alteration of the identity of the team if you go in that direction. So you have to decide whether or not you think Paolo and Franz are going to be good enough eventually to do this, or if you need to look to go another direction. I would be hard pressed to make that kind of decision after such a weird season with so many injuries that clearly disrupted rhythm and kept their 3 core perimeter guys from being healthy on the floor at the same time. That's all a disappointment. So like I would probably wait another year before making that sort of big picture decision. That said, a lot of it has to do with like price and opportunity. So like, let's say you can get D'Angelo Russell on a mid-level exception this summer. Maybe you look at it like, let's get him. He can be he can be someone that we use in our rotation, and we can determine whether or not he fits the mold of what we're trying to do with our offensive build, or punt on it if we want to as well, or use him as a tradable piece, whatever it is that you want to do. If you can get a discounted player that fits that mold of like floor general, then maybe you look into using that as like a temporary kind of like test of that build. But I just wouldn't go extensively in the form of expending assets to take on that type of player until I've seen a larger sample size of a healthy Franz, a healthy Paolo, a healthy Jalen Suggs, and see if this team can make some steps. Because here's the thing, they all need to get better at shooting. But you know what's a huge punch in the gut when you're trying to work on your jump shot is when you can't play basketball for 2 months because you tore your oblique or the abdominal muscle or whatever it was that those guys tore. So like it's one of those things where it's just such a disrupted season that I think you can make some mistakes when you overreact. A classic example for me as a Lakers fan was in 2021. They lose a series to the Phoenix Suns where AD and LeBron are both coming back from injuries, and both are not even close to what their best versions of themselves are. Then AD goes down with an injury and they lose ugly to the Suns. And then suddenly it's like, we need to blow this thing up. And it's like, no, you don't. You're fine. If LeBron's healthy and AD's healthy and you got all these role players, you're arguably the best team in the league. So just don't overreact to bizarre circumstances punting a season. Give it some more time. Hey, Jason, I'm curious to figure out in a hypothetical OKC versus Boston finals, who would be the best matchup for Boston to attack since they lead into a lot of matchup attacking? Would they target Shea a ton to test his on-ball defense against the Jays and tire his legs out? Or would Boston have to use their size advantages over most of OKC's perimeter players? Love the show and appreciate the knowledge you bring to the game. Thanks. Thanks for the kind words from all of you guys. I think Boston and the Lakers are two teams that will primarily focus on matchup hunting their smaller perimeter players in the post. That could be some Isaiah Joe, too. That could be some Cason Wallace, too. I agree with you that attacking Shea has the added benefit of tiring his legs out, especially when you factor in that Shea is such a pull-up jump shot centric player. And as we've talked about so much on the show, pull-up jump shooting is mostly about your base. The skill piece is tied together by your footwork, your ability to get separation, and your ability to get lift. And so when you can disrupt a person's ability to get lift, it can lead to them missing shots. Specifically, Boston and LA are the two teams that can put together 5-man groupings where all of the shooters are guys that you can't leave open. There's a difference between this guy can knock down a shot and like this guy's a 40% three-point shooter. And it's like DFS is a 40% three-point shooter. Rui's a 40% three-point shooter. LeBron is nearly a 40% three-point shooter. Austin Reeves is close, and he's a very good closeout attacker. Like, they'll be able to space the floor and attack smalls in space. Boston, same sort of thing. Whether it's Porzingis and Horford, or one of them, or even like a bench group with Hauser when they go small, they have all these different versions of 5-man groupings where it's like even the guys that are not shooting super well this season, like Jaylen Brown and Drew Holiday, if you just leave them open, like they can make you pay. So like that is what puts these one-on-one situations in play where if you have a Tatum who's 6'9" and big and strong, or LeBron who's 6'9" and big and strong, or Luka who's 6'9" and big and strong, or Jaylen Brown who's 6'7" and big and strong, and you let them pick on these smaller perimeter players in space, they can cause some damage. And then you can potentially bring that second defender over and get them in rotation consistently. But there's no doubt that OKC's matchup weakness that teams will attempt to attack is going to be their smalls in the post. I also think they're a little bit vulnerable to teams that attack the offensive glass extensively as well. All right. Our next question here. Do you think the rough criticism and view on Tatum is because he hasn't redeemed himself for that 2022 finals meltdown, and he's suffering from a narrative that Curry did? An easier run in 2015 or 2024, and after they both choked in 2016, 2022, the rings with KD in 2024 just doesn't resonate with the public. Does Tatum need a more average team in the finals and to win to redeem himself like Curry did in 2022? Here's the thing. Most of the serious people who cover the media that I follow do believe that Jason Tatum is a proven excellent playoff performer who belongs in the top tier of superstars, or at least close to that level. There's a certain like court of public opinion thing that you can never really hope to win. Like, for instance, I believe LeBron's resume at this point is so overwhelmingly good that like if you just discount him entirely in the GOAT conversation, like I don't understand your thought process. But there's even if LeBron won another title this year with Luka and won finals MVP, those people aren't going to change their minds. There's a certain amount of like unassailable accomplishment. And this was what Steph did in 2022, where he gets this win and like most of that like middle portion of people that were kind of on the fence about what Steph was or what he wasn't, it becomes unassailable. And then now all of a sudden Steph has this like kind of resounding acceptance as one of the all-time greats because he won that 4th title without KD. But there's still a segment that to this day doesn't view Steph in that light. And you're never going to change those people's minds. So to put it simply, like, you're right. The 2024 title is not going to move the court of public opinion that much. It's the team was way too talented. They got some favorable matchups and they kicked everyone's butt. That's not going to be the one that's going to just be this unassailable accomplishment that's going to change everybody's mind. For the record, it's possible that Tatum doesn't get that type of opportunity for several years because of how talented the roster is. But Tatum's young. He's got a lot of years left in this league. I mean, even if it was 4 years from now, he'd be 30. I have a feeling 30-year-old Jason Tatum is going to be a pretty damn good basketball player, and he's going to have an opportunity to prove that sort of thing. It's kind of weird. KD's an interesting example of this because, like, I didn't need to see KD go to the Warriors to know that he could win a championship. Like, KD to me was always a player that on the right type of roster could win a title. That said, like KD also has to realize that those titles, the 2017 and 2018 titles on the 73-win Warriors that he joined, were never going to be the things that swayed the court of public opinion. Like that's just the reality of how that stuff works. So like, yeah, on one level, Tatum will need to win a more difficult title to sway the court of public opinion to a certain extent. But I think pursuing that sort of thing is silly simply because the court of public opinion is insatiable and impossible to satisfy. And like, you're never going to really make any headway there anyway. So Tatum should just focus on winning as much as possible for his own benefit and for the good faith people out there that are going to acknowledge what he can do as a basketball player. But like, to me, focusing on like whether or not this ring really counts or like how impressive the degree of difficulty was on this particular title, that's an argument for the court of public opinion, and it's not really relevant to what these guys are doing on any given day. Hey, Jason, love the show. You've said a few times, we have two more questions, guys. You've said a few times that you're willing to explain specific elements of the game for those of us who didn't play basketball at a high level. Is there any way you could give a brief explanation on what defensive schemes work best against Jokic, Shea, Giannis, and Jason Tatum? So against Jokic, I actually think the best method to attack him is to deny him the basketball as much as possible. I thought the Lakers did an amazing job of this in the game that they won in Denver. And if you go back through most of their recent games, that's one of the worst offensive performances Denver had this season. And it wasn't because they doubled Jokic. It's because they tried to refuse him catches altogether. That forced him to catch the ball further out. And then the second piece of it was don't double from Jokic's front side, double from the baseline, meaning don't double from the three-point line, double along the baseline. That way you can force him to drop step right into traffic where everyone's already waiting. That's what the Lakers did. They fronted the post, bracketed him, denied catches. Jokic had to catch further away from the basket. Then they disengage and funnel him towards the sideline. And as soon as he pivoted or drop step towards the baseline, the second defender was already there waiting. And they just geared everything towards trying to make their limited shooters make threes on the weak side. Now, as we've seen, simply like the Thunder game the other night, the second Thunder game, they can hit those shots and they can still beat you. They're one of the best offenses in the NBA. There's no proven method to shut down Jokic and the Nuggets. I'm just saying if I was coaching against Jokic and the Nuggets, I would build my defensive scheme around ball denial, funneling towards the sideline, doubling from the baseline. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, I would trap him on ball screens and double team him just a ton. I think that the Thunder are somewhat limited in their ability to consistently capitalize on 4-on-3s because they're a little young and a little inexperienced and a little inconsistent as jump shooters. I also think Shai is a perfectly fine passer, but he's not the best, like, get skip passes out over double teams kind of guy. That's how I would guard Shai. Giannis, it's the classic build a wall, stay in front of him, help off of limited shooters, and just basically make him play in a crowd all game long. Jason Tatum, it's switch, contain, bait into ISOs. Specifically meaning there, Tatum is a better playmaker than most of his forward peers at his position. And so if you can force him to play one-on-one a bunch, but bait him into jump shots by switching, gapping, taking away the easy passing reads, but making him play on an island, I think you can bait him into some tough shot selection. All right, last question. Another Tatum question related to Luka. Jason, I'm a big fan of your show, especially the fact that your opinions are backed up by not only statistics, but by good basketball eye actually watching the games. I'm a big Celtics fan, and I don't hate you or the way you cover the team. And honestly, I think most of the coverage is pretty fair. The only issue I have, and most rational Celtics fans, is when players are anointed without any postseason success. Example, Shea or Ant-Man. It's just unfair to Tatum and Brown, and non-Celtics too have been doing it year after year at the conference finals level and above. I think Shea is the rightful MVP, but I feel like a conference finals postseason run should be a prerequisite for a top 5 player. If you think about it, for the 4 teams that make the conference finals every year, should be plenty of opportunities for a top 5 player. I digress. Now to my actual question. You discuss player archetypes a lot, and you claim that the offensive engine is the most valuable. My counterpoint to this will be the offensive engine archetype. Luka, for example, will make the role players better and produce great offense for the team. However, I think where it's flawed is when there's actually talent on the team. The talent can be suppressed by the offensive engine iso-balling and not allowing for others to excel to their potential, leading to never maximizing the team's ceiling. I think a great example of this is Luka having Brunson and Porzingis right under his nose, but due to his iso ball, offensive engine play type, they could never reach their full potential. Did you ever consider the fact that allowing others to excel is actually crucial to a team's success and should be a factor when evaluating a player? I believe that Tatum only gets negativity from having a super team. The Celtics do have a great team that fits perfectly, shout out to Brad, but he never actually gets credit for allowing everyone to excel and being a winning team player. While still being soon to be 4X first team All-NBA, I firmly believe the Celtics would be worse, not a champion, if you replace Tatum with Luka due to him being a defensive negative and suppressing his talented teammates. Would love to hear your thoughts. Okay, a lot to get into there, but I picked this question because I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff to get into here. First of all, a couple like basic things that I disagree with. Brunson was excellent with Luka. The job that he did alongside Luka in that role was what allowed him to get a massive payday from the New York Knicks. You just had a situation where they let him walk. For what Nico Harrison just didn't think Brunson was good. That was a Nico Harrison problem, not a Luka Doncic problem. Kristaps Porzingis, if you remember, those of you guys who remember the Rick Carlisle rants, he was not a good post player back then, and he wanted to post up. And he's changed fundamentally as a player by becoming a better post-up player. He unlocked that in Washington, and he's continued it in Boston. Porzingis has gotten better. That's not a Luka problem. That's a Porzingis problem. Specifically, the idea of replacing Tatum with Luka. I think if you replace Tatum with Luka, the Celtics would immediately become even better. And the reason why I feel that way is a specific concept having to do with taking on two on the basketball every single time down the floor and the type of advantages that that creates. So, first of all, I think there's a reputation with Luka that he is only going to allow you to take catch and shoot jump shots or catch lobs. That's not true. That has been a team construct among the Dallas Mavericks. In the Dallas Mavericks build, it was a lot of specific play finishers, lob threats around the basket, catch and shoot guys, a lot of like Derrick Jones Jr., who can't dribble or pass very well. PJ Washington, who can't dribble or pass very well. Like even Dorian Finney-Smith back in the day was an example of that, right? This Lakers build is fundamentally different because they're surrounded by guys that can actually dribble, shoot, and pass. LeBron can dribble, shoot, and pass. Austin can dribble, shoot, and pass. Rui Hachimura has more advanced closeout attacking ability. They do have play finishers. That fifth guy is either going to be Dorian Finney-Smith, who's a catch-and-shoot guy, or Jackson Hayes, who's a vertical spacer. But four of the players on the floor are not the traditional Dallas Mavericks build of Luka and play finishers. This is a different build. It's Luka with a bunch of talent, and it has immediately led to massive returns. Here's a crazy stat to demonstrate this for you. When Luka shoots out of pick and roll, he's been brutal. I've talked about this. He's having a super down shot-making stretch with the Lakers. 12 games, 2 games where he's had at least 10 made field goals. Last year with Dallas, in 70 games, he had 50 games where he made at least 10 field goals. Luka is far from where he needs to be as a shot maker. On ball screens, he's shooting just 39%. And if you factor in turnovers, when Luka takes a shot or turns the ball over, he's only getting like 0.75 points per possession in ball screens. Here's the problem. Luka has drawn a second defender to ball screens 129 times out of 181 ball screens. That's over 71% of the time that Luka runs a ball screen, they're doubling him. As a result, even though he's shooting like shit and turning the ball over, a Luka ball screen with the Lakers has been worth 1.1 points per possession, which is off the charts good when you factor in the fact that he can't make a damn shot. It's in the 87th percentile regardless of surrounding circumstance. And he can't make anything. Because once you bring two to the ball it creates advantages. And I've talked about this concept nonstop. If you have a closeout, a player having to sprint to guard a player versus him already being squared up, the efficiency skyrockets. Now, for regular play finishers like the Dorian Finney-Smith types, the PJ Washington types, the Derrick Jones Jr. types, that sort of guy is going to have a limitation in his ability to consistently score against closeouts. But look at how Rui and LeBron and Austin have been thriving off of that attention to the tune of 1.1 points per possession. So the point is like, if you're under the impression that Luka playing with the Celtics and running ball screens with Horford or Porzingis or anybody and getting blitzed every single time wouldn't lead to the Celtics just picking teams apart, frankly, I think you're wrong. Like, to put it simply, what do I beg Tatum and Brown to do every time we talk about the Celtics? I beg for them to find a matchup that they like and pressure the rim so successfully that it becomes untenable for the defense, that they bring in second defenders so they can get into their drive and kick game so they can get wide open catch and shoot threes, because that's when they're at their best. They don't get that as much because teams look at Tatum and Brown and go, we'd rather have them play ISO. Every single team in the NBA looks at Luka Doncic and goes, fuck that, get the ball out of his hands. It's a fundamentally different type of offensive talent. There is a chasm, in my opinion. As good as Tatum is, there's a chasm, in my opinion, between Tatum and Luka as offensive initiators. And so if you put Luka surrounded by Derek White and Jaylen Brown and Kristaps Porzingis and Drew Holiday, I think they'd score. I think they'd be the greatest offense in the history of the NBA. And like, by the way, I think this Laker team has potential with a full training camp, getting healthy. I think they have the potential to reach a really special offensive level. And we'll see what happens in the long run. If what I'm saying is true, then we will see that manifest if the Lakers can keep Luka surrounded with a similar level of offensive talent. But again, I'm not trying to hate on Tatum because we're specifically focusing on offensive initiation. Tatum is a infinitely better defensive player. He is so much more versatile in the ways that he can be deployed, even off the ball. Like Tatum is a much better catch and shoot player than Luka Doncic. There's a lot of complications with that debate that bring Tatum very close to where Luka is as an overall basketball player. But if you specifically focus on shot creation, Luka can consistently bring two to the ball. And that is the fundamental difference between him and just about everyone else in the league. Guys, 181 ball screens. And he's playing alongside LeBron and Austin and all these offensive players. And teams are like, we don't care. Get the ball out of Luka's hands. And that is a testament to just how gifted of an offensive player that Luka Doncic is. All right, guys, that's all I have for today. As always, I sincerely appreciate you guys for supporting me and supporting the show. Thanks for dropping mailbag questions in as always. I believe our next episode is tomorrow morning, Friday. We're breaking down the Thursday night slate. As always, I appreciate you guys, and I will see you then.